Now I'm going to begin carving the first layer of my color reductive block. So I've got the entire image drawn out in Sharpie marker. I did, like I said before, I kept it just in pencil for that circle around it because I don't want the Sharpie marker. If I had outlined that in Sharpie, it could transfer to the print when I go to print my lightest color. So I just left that in pencil. I might need to redraw it again after I've printed my first layer, but I've got it in place. If you look at my initial sketch, the drawing is a lot looser than my sketches because I know that I can put in those details while I'm carving. One of the things to keep in mind when you're carving, make sure you're using that bench hook to keep everything straight. And then I'm just going to be carving out the parts that I want to keep white in the print. Now, bones are white themselves, but there's still value to it. There's still shadows, there's darker areas, there's lighter areas. So I'm not going to just carve out the entire skull. I'm just going to carve out the areas that I want to keep as white highlights. So if you notice in my picture here, the teeth have some very bright whites in them. There's some area here that I'll probably have white highlights, some area here. So I'm just going to kind of go through and carve out any areas that I want to keep white. You will notice that the linoleum is much more difficult to carve. You have to put a little bit of extra pressure in there when you're carving. And one of the things you can do if you're having a really hard time with it is you can actually warm up the linoleum to make it a little bit easier to carve. So what I did is I actually put my block just out in the sun for a couple minutes to kind of warm it up and let me make it a little bit easier for me while I'm carving. You can also, if it's not sunny out, if you're doing this in the evening, you can kind of warm it up with like an iron set on like a really low setting. So you don't want to melt the block, but you can kind of warm it up a little bit, and that makes it a little bit easier to carve. So in order of kind of hardness or most difficult, wood blocks are kind of the most difficult to carve, and then linoleum is a little bit easier than that. And the speedy carve material is extremely easy. But with the speedy carve, you can't quite get as tight of detail as you can using linoleum or wood blocks. So again, when you're carving, think about the shape. You know, all of the lines that I have drawn in here are called cross contour lines, meaning they follow the general shape of the form. And again, so for mine, like even though, you know, bones are generally white, I'm not carving out the entire bone structure. I'm just carving out the areas that I'm going to keep as white highlights. I'm going to carve out the veins of this clover here. So I'll carve out the rest of those. I'm going to add some more highlights on the top side of the skull, and then also probably like along this ridge here too. And then, like I said before, you know, the common mistake that people make when they're starting their color reductive is that first layer, and it's either you're not carving enough white highlights or you're carving too much. So you got to try to find a good balance between it. Because I'm making this a 3-layer print, I'm going to have the white of the paper. I'm going to have, I haven't decided on color yet, but let's pretend that I'm doing blue. So I'll have white of the paper, light blue, medium blue, and then a very, very dark blue or black for my final color. So that leaves 4 values that I can get out of this. So when I'm thinking about how much white to carve, I probably want to carve somewhere along the lines of 1/4 of the image. So like a percentage of the image, 1/4 of it should be white. So I'm going to keep carving this for a while, but I think that'll give you a good start.